One tip for every single killer perk in Dead by Daylight, let's go. A Nurse's Calling. If you use this perk on killers that have a 24-meter terror radius, you'll be able to see the survivor's auras while healing before they can even hear you. Pair this with other perks and abilities that decrease or eliminate your terror radius to get a ton of use out of this perk. Agitation. Use this perk to get to better hook locations on the map. Sometimes it's worth it to spend the extra few seconds to place the survivor in an area that makes it more risky for their teammates to save them. Like for example, those weird pocket edges on Groaning Storehouse, or just on a hill or the basement or something. Alien Instinct. Similar to the survivor perk Counterforce, don't fall into the trap of always going toward the aura that this perk shows. This aura shows the farthest person away from you, so it'll obviously take you the most amount of time to get to them. Keep their location in the back of your mind, but if you have information or an educated guess on where other closer survivors might be, you may want to find and chase them instead. Awakened Awareness. It's generally not worth it trying to actively get value out of this perk. If you're carrying someone, you're extremely slow unless you're using Agitation, so you should really just go to your hook while looking around to see if there's any survivors nearby, but don't actively walk around while carrying someone to look for the survivors. Bamboozle. You should almost always do a moonwalk mind game before bamboozling a window. By doing this, you'll likely have time to catch the survivor off guard and get a hit before they can make it to another resource. However, if you do this every time, good survivors will catch on and just hold W against it, so make sure you switch up your strategy constantly. BBQ Chili. Don't just use this perk for information. Also use its lack of information. If you don't see all of the auras of the survivors when you hook someone, there are only a few options. 1, they're within 40 meters from you. 2, they have an anti-aura perk like Distortion. Or 3, they're in a locker, which is really unlikely since BBQ isn't that common of a perk anymore. This lack of info can turn into information for you to know what perks the survivor may have or if there's survivors nearby. Beast of Prey. There is literally zero reason you should ever run this perk. Bitter Murmur. This is a great perk to pair with endgame perks such as Rancor or Noed, since you can see everyone's aura for 10 seconds when the last gen pops. Blood Echo. You should really only use this perk on Legion or Plague, otherwise it's kind of a waste of a perk slot. To get value, you need to have a lot of people injured at once, and those are really the only 2 killers that are good at doing that. Blood Warden. A lot of people seem to forget that Blood Warden also shows you the auras of any survivor near the exit gates, so if you get this perk to activate, make sure you immediately look towards each exit gate to see if anyone is there. This could give you major information that might turn a 4-man escape into a 4K. Bloodhound. This is a pretty straightforward perk, so there aren't many tips I can give you besides the fact that the blood from the survivor's perspective disappears faster than it does from your perspective, so if they're trying to stealth, it might catch them off guard. But obviously, this isn't really something you can control. Brutal Strength. Similar to Bamboozle, you can do a moonwalk mind game and break a pallet quickly, giving the survivor significantly less distance to make it to another resource. Call of Brine. Keep in mind that the aura of the gen you kick will remain yellow even if the generator stops regressing, so keep a lookout for the loud noise notifications when survivors hit good skill checks to have a clear indicator that the gen is no longer regressing. Claustrophobia. Pair this perk with killers or other perks that can eliminate pallets faster. If you do this, survivors will almost have nothing they can use in chase while Claustrophobia is active. So killers like Billy or Demo or Bubba, and perks like Hex Blood Favor, Enduring, and Spirit Fury are all great options. Corrupt Intervention. Remember that this perk deactivates when you down a survivor, so if there are 2 survivors nearby, it's probably better to injure one and then start chasing the other just to apply additional slowdown and pressure before the perk deactivates. Coulrophobia. If you're using this perk, you need to synergize it with other things to actually get any value out of it. For example, you can pair it with things that apply Mangled to make extremely slow healing times, and you can pair it with Unnerving Presence to make the skill checks really difficult. Coup de Grace. The biggest mistake I see is people not knowing when to use this perk in a match. A lot of people will find zero value out of this perk because they use it every time it's activated, but remember that you can save it by just not lunging, so you can have it in a more useful situation later in the match. Dark Devotion. Pair this with insta-down perks or insta-down killers to catch a lot of survivors off guard and to get a few free downs throughout the match. It also works extremely well with the twins because Charlotte already goes undetectable when you're controlling Victor, so if you hit the obsession with Victor, you'll regain control of Charlotte but still be undetectable, and it'll really confuse the survivors. But of course, that means you would have to play the twins, so maybe don't do that. Darkness Revealed. A lot of people will use this perk with killers like Huntress or Trickster, but remember that their reload animations take 3 seconds, so you'll only be able to see auras for 2 seconds after the animation is over. You may want to consider either using reload speed increases like add-ons or Iron Maiden, or you could use Lethal Pursuer to extend the aura duration by an additional 2 seconds. Dead Man's Switch. This perk is fantastic on killers that can easily force you off gens from a far distance. Killers like Artist, Doctor, or even Huntress and Freddy can essentially activate Dead Man's Switch whenever they want. Deadlock. If you know that 2 gens are close to being popped, chase the survivors off a gen that's in a more advantageous position for you and let the other one get completed. This will block the gen that's better for you, giving you 30 seconds to down someone and activate maybe a gen slowdown perk that you may have like Pop or Pain Res. Deathbound. Many less experienced players might use this perk on Legion because the logic is that Legion can injure people often, so they need to heal a lot, which will activate Deathbound a lot. However, good players do not heal against Legion, so if anything, you're getting less value by using this perk on them. Deerstalker. This perk is best used on killers that have high mobility. If you ever need a slug to gain pressure, you can go to somewhere on the complete opposite side of the map, down someone, and come back, likely before that survivor's been picked up. When you come back, you'll probably find another survivor, and you can rinse and repeat this process. Discordance. Penance. This is one of the best info perks in the entire game since it can help you figure out where every single survivor is, as well as giving you a solid understanding of how progressed a certain generator is. This perk requires you to have really good game knowledge to understand how to read the information it's giving you properly, so just try to use this perk as much as you can to learn. Dissolution. Pair this perk with other perks that make windows bad, like Bamboozle or Superior Anatomy. This will put survivors into situations where they either take a hit or break the pallet for you. Distressing. There's pretty much no reason to ever use this perk unless you're using perks like Starstruck, Coulrophobia, or Unnerving Presence. Dragon's Grip. Coordinated survivors will easily counter this perk and make you waste a lot of your time. You really need to keep track of injured survivors and where they are in relation to the gens you kick. If they're good players, they'll always have an injured person touch the gens that you kick to apply the expose to them, since they're injured, so it doesn't matter anyway. Don't waste your Dragon's Grip on gens if there's an injured survivor nearby. Dying Light. Try to put a lot of pressure on the Obsession if you're using this perk. The Obsession gains an extremely useful 33% additional speed to healing and unhooking, so if you apply pressure to the Obsession without necessarily killing them, you can prevent them from doing these altruistic actions, essentially mitigating the downside of this perk. Enduring. Please never use this perk without Spirit Fury. Eruption. Don't pair this with other perks that block generators. Gens cannot regress while they're blocked, so you may get a lot of wasted value out of this perk. Fearmonger. If you're struggling with Made for This survivors, this is a great perk to run since Made for This deactivates when the survivor is exhausted. Fire Up. It's really hard to get value out of this perk on its own, so make sure you pair it with other perks like Brutal Strength or Bamboozle to amplify its effect. Forced Hesitation. If you want to get max value out of this perk, make sure you run it on a stealth killer or an insta-down killer with stealth add-ons or with stealth perks. This perk is only useful if survivors are grouped up, and it's much easier to find grouped up survivors when they don't know you're near them. Forced Penance. You can force a protection hit by switching targets mid-chase. If you hit someone while a different person's spider-like things on their HUD are still tingling, it'll count as a protection hit. Franklin's Demise. I would recommend using this perk only if there are 3 or 4 toolboxes or medkits. Flashlights, maps, and keys are not worth wasting a slot for this perk because they're all pretty bad items in most situations. Furtive Chase. The new version of this perk is extremely good on killers that have insta-down abilities or killers with high mobility. Whenever you hook your Obsession, you become undetectable for 18 seconds, which is enough time for you to completely catch a survivor off guard. Game Afoot. This perk makes it so that if you hit the player with the highest total chase time, it'll turn them into the Obsession. So it's a great perk to pair with the new Furtive Chase because it usually means that the person you're chasing the most is probably the best survivor on the team, and getting that undetectable effect from Furtive Chase will help you quickly down the worst survivors while the best survivor is unable to help the team. Gearhead. It's really easy to forget about this perk's effect while you have it on. Make sure you're constantly looking around at your gens whenever you injure someone to make sure you can see survivors' auras if they hit a good skill check. This is a significantly underrated info perk because the survivors won't even know that you have it. Genetic Limits. This is a great perk to use on Oni, especially if you're using Fearmonger as well. This essentially makes them either exhausted the entire game or injured the entire game, and both of these are extremely useful for you, especially in the Made for This meta we have right now. Grim Embrace. Try not to pair this perk with other gen blocking perks. If you activate Grim Embrace right before another gen blocking perk deactivates, it'll also deactivate your Grim Embrace on the generators that were blocked prior. This is how it used to work, but it might have been patched, so just keep it in the back of your mind. Hex Blood Favor. This perk works on ranged killers too, so if you go for long shots, you can block the pallets in an area that's not even near you. Hex Crowd Control. Pair this with other perks that are good against pallets like Spirit Fury and Enduring, because the survivors will basically not be able to use windows, forcing them to use pallets. Hex Devour Hope. If you're chasing a survivor and you know that another survivor is about to get unhooked and you have 2 stacks, it may be worth it to wait the extra seconds for the unhook to occur before hitting the survivor so that you can insta-down them. This will save you a lot of time in the long run. Hex Face the Darkness. This is a really good info perk on stealth killers like Wraith and Ghostface for 2 reasons. 1, the perk activates when you injure a survivor but deactivates if you down them. Wraith and Ghostface both thrive on the hit and run playstyle, so you can get a lot of value out of this perk without too many downsides. And 2, this perk only makes survivors scream and shows you their auras if they're outside of your terror radius, and obviously these 2 killers can have no terror radius basically whenever they want, so you will get almost constant information. Hex Haunted Ground. If you pair this perk with Undying, you're able to get 2 uses out of it. Hex Huntress Lullaby. This perk does not work on special skill checks like those found on Decisive Strike, Merciless Storm, snapping out of it, etc. I personally think it should since it's a Hex perk that can be deactivated, but I digress. Hex No One Escapes Death. If you're learning how to play killer, don't use this perk. It's a complete noob trap that'll not let you learn how to actually apply pressure during early and mid game. Don't create the bad habit of relying on Noed to get kills if you actually want to improve at killer. Hex Pentimento. Everyone knows to pair this with other Hex perks like Plaything to get really good value out of it, but you can also pair it with Shattered Hope to break boon totems and rekindle them as a Pentimento totem. But unfortunately, Shattered Hope is not worth running in this current meta because boon totems are absolutely terrible right now. Hex Plaything. There's pretty much no reason to run this perk without using Pentimento as well. Hex Retribution. This perk is really good paired with Haunted Ground because if Haunted Ground gets cleansed, you'll be able to see the survivor's auras for 15 seconds to get a ton of value out of your insta-down potential. Hex Ruin. A lot of people seem to forget that this perk now deactivates if you kill a survivor. So if you're one of those people that tunnels off of first sook, A, stop doing that because it's really cringe, and B, don't run this perk. Hex the Third Seal. This perk is really really only good on hit and run killers like Ghostface, Wraith, and Hag because you need to hit each unique survivor to apply the effect to them. I wouldn't really recommend using it otherwise. Hex Thrill of the Hunt. I would honestly not recommend using this perk even on a full totem build. There are so many better alternatives for Hex perks that'll give you much more value than this perk will, including Hex Undying. The aura rating you can get on this perk is surprisingly useful. Because of this, some people may think that Lethal Pursuer is a decent perk to pair with this so you can see the aura for longer, but this perk combo doesn't actually work. Undying reveals auras within a radius of a dual totem, not for a certain amount of time, meaning it's impossible for the aura reading duration to be extended since there's no duration to begin with. Hoarder. If you pair this perk with Franklin's Demise, you have a pretty decent information perk combo to know when these survivors are picking up their items. Hubris. This perk is essentially useless if you're not using other perks that have to do with pallets like Enduring, Spirit Fury, or Brutal Strength. Hysteria. The effect and the cooldown for this perk have the exact same length of 30 seconds, so you can know exactly when the survivors will no longer be oblivious. I'm all ears. A lot of people only use this perk on killers that can hit through walls like Pyramid Head or Nurse, but it's also a really good perk on killers like Deathslinger, who can fake going one way, then aim at the window and shoot through the window to hit the survivor as they go by. Infectious Fright. Don't feel the need to always slug if there is a survivor that screams nearby. Usually if the survivor's nearby, they likely won't be doing anything useful, so it might not be worth it to leave the survivor slug to chase after them since they're not doing anything anyway. Insidious. For all you face camping bubbas out there, remember that there is now an anti-face camping mechanic, so if you use Insidious next to the hook, the survivor will be able to unhook themselves. Iron Grasp. There is almost zero reason to use this perk. If you want to carry survivors for longer, use Agitation. The only time this perk is relatively useful is if you have a hook survivors in the basement challenge or if you're doing a fun Mad Grit build. Iron Maiden. A lot of people use this perk on killers that have to reload at lockers like Huntress or Trickster. I do it too because it's really satisfying, but it's honestly a waste of a perk slot. It only saves 0.75 seconds every time you reload, which obviously doesn't do much. Jolt. A lot of people throw on this perk and just let it passively apply gen regression, but if you want more value out of this perk, you need to start using it a bit more actively. Start zoning survivors towards progressed gens before downing them rather than just downing them willy-nilly. In some situations, this could give you a lot more slowdown than you would have had otherwise. Also, hook survivors near gens so that you bring the survivors to them, potentially giving you more jolt value. Knockout. If you use this perk and never hook any survivor, you should stop doing that because it's extremely boring. Lethal Pursuer. A lot of people use this perk to go to the closest survivor to them off of spawn, but what you should do instead is go to the area with the most amount of survivors. This will let you pressure multiple survivors at once, forcing them to waste a bit of time going to a different area of the map. Leverage. I don't really have any tips for this perk because it's extremely situational and not very useful. Lightborn. I know I say it in every single video, but this is objectively a waste of a perk slot unless you have light sensitivities. I know a majority of you believe this is a good perk because you're newer to the game, but flashlights are extremely easy to counter once you get more experience. But you obviously can't get that experience on how to counter flashlights if you keep putting on Lightborn whenever you see one. I will say this perk is actually kind of decent right now since the survivor perk background player got a massive buff, allowing survivors to run from a really far away area to go for a flashlight save. So I don't actually think it's terrible right now, but if background player gets nerfed, try taking it off so you can actually gain more experience and become a better killer. Machine Learning. This perk gives you 30 seconds of 10% faster speed while also being undetectable if the survivors pop a gen that you kick. If you pair this with Bitter Murmur, you can get a ton of value out of this perk because you can go exactly straight to the survivors without them knowing that you're coming to them. Mad Grit. There is zero reason to use this perk when Starstruck exists. Make your choice. If you're for some reason playing the Knight, you can go out of the make your choice radius but still spawn a guard near the hook. This will apply pressure to the survivors while still activating make your choice. Merciless Storm. Use this perk with Tinkerer so you know when exactly to chase survivors off the gens. For example, if Tinkerer triggers on a gen, you can wait 16 seconds and then pressure the survivor off the gen to activate Merciless Storm. You can also do this from a distance with killers like Freddy, Doctor, and Artist. Monitor and Abuse. There are many add-on combos that you can use to essentially create a new stealth killer. For example, you can use this perk with 2 of Doctor's comm add-ons to have a 10-meter tear radius, or you could pair this perk with Dead Rabbit on Myers to have an almost non-existent tear radius in tier 2. Nemesis. This is a great perk to pair with the new Furtive Chase because you'll be able to get constant value since you'll almost always be chasing and hooking the Obsession. No Way Out. This is a really simple perk that you just kind of throw on to have, so my tip is to just use it more. In my opinion, it's one of the best perks in the entire game, and I don't see a lot of people using it. Nowhere to Hide. The radius of this perk is attached to your body, not to the generator that you kick. So when you activate this perk, make sure you're moving around so you can almost extend that aura rating radius, if that makes sense. Oppression. The Oppression skill check works with other perks like Unnerving Presence and Hex Huntress Lullaby, which can create insane gen slowdown potential like you see in this clip. Overcharge. The Overcharge skill check should also be affected by Unnerving Presence and Hex Huntress Lullaby, although this has been bugged in the past, so I don't know if it currently works. Overwhelming Presence. This is one of the worst perks in the entire game, but if you do use it with distressing so your tear radius at least becomes a bit bigger. Play with your food. Here's a list of all the killer interactions that will not get rid of your play with your food tokens. Charging your Hillbilly or Bubba chainsaw, although you will lose a stack when you actually use the chainsaw. Claw, both of Doctor's Shocks, using Clown Bottles, using your green Plague Puke, although the red Puke will use a token, rushing as Blight, but if you swing while rushing, you will lose a token, summoning Artist Crows, also if a survivor walks into an idle crow, but you will lose a token if you launch a crow, summoning Knight's Guards, unless they hit a survivor, and Singularity Biopods. Pop Goes the Weasel. Many people will fall into the trap of going too far out of their way to pop a highly progressed gen. In some circumstances, you might be better off using your pop on a less progressed gen that's in a more advantageous position for you. Predator. You're actually better off not using this perk because it makes it less likely you'll see the survivor scratch marks from further away. Usually, the wider scratch marks will cause them to appear on trees and on walls, making it much easier for you to spot. Rancor. Use Bitter Murmur if you want to get any value out of this perk. You'll be able to see exactly where the obsession is so you can go straight to them. Rapid Brutality. This is a great perk to pair with Save the Best for Last if you absolutely hate the survivor hold W meta. Remember me, there's almost no point in running this perk when No Way Out exists, especially considering that the perk doesn't even work if the obsession is opening the gate. Save the Best for Last. A lot of people will only use this perk on killers that can easily M2 to save their stacks like Demo or Pig, etc. However, this perk is still really good on M1 killers. You just have to have good game knowledge on when it's worth to chase the obsession and lose stacks. Scourge Hook Floods of Rage. Just like Lethal Pursuer, you should generally try to apply pressure to groups of survivors rather than survivors that are closest to you, since that'll waste more of their time. Scourge Hook Gift of Pain. This is a great perk on Oni because it severely dissuades survivors from healing. It not only gives them mangled and hemorrhage, keeping them injured for longer, but it also gives 16% slower healing and repair speed until you injure them again, so they're kind of put into a lose-lose situation. Scourge Hook Hangman's Trick. Although this is now a Scourge Hook perk, you still receive a loud noise notification when someone is sabotaging a hook, no matter what type of hook it is. Scourge Hook Monstrous Shrine. This perk is purely useful to give you an additional 4 Scourge Hooks in the basement, so you can gain a lot of pressure by having someone in the basement while still receiving the Scourge Hook effects from your other perks. Scourge Hook Pain Resonance. Do not pair this perk with other perks that block generators like Thrilling Tremors. Gens cannot regress while they're blocked, so you'll be getting almost no value out of your Pain Res hooks. Septic Touch. This perk is awful, but if you're gonna use it, make sure you pair it with killers and perks that increase your terror radius by as much as you can. Shadowborn. This perk can actually be useful on a couple killers to make it a tiny bit easier to see while they're locked in an animation. Using it on Nurse makes it a bit easier to see where the survivor is going after you get fatigued, and using it on killers that reload at lockers lets you have a wider field of view to see auras like gens or people if you're using like Darkness Revealed, for example. But everyone knows that you just use this perk for aesthetic reasons. Shattered Hope. You can instantly create a Pentimento totem by breaking boon totems with this perk, but good luck finding someone that's actually running a boon perk. Sloppy Butcher. A lot of people just think that this perk applies mangled and hemorrhage when you hit a survivor with a basic attack, but it also has 2 additional effects. All survivors bleed twice as much, and hemorrhage regression rate is increased by 25%. So you could technically get value out of Sloppy without ever hitting someone with a basic attack. Spies from the Shadows. Learn how to utilize crows without using this perk. This perk is essentially base kit on outdoor maps since you can see the crows fly into the air when someone spooks them. Spirit Fury. Never use tier 1 or 2 of this perk, even if you're using Enduring. It's just not worth the perk slot. Starstruck. The exposed status effect lingers for 30 seconds even if you drop the survivor, so you could catch survivors off guard by using Fire Up to pick up and drop survivors extremely quickly to activate their exposed. This is very situational, but it would be really funny to pull off. Strider. If you're using this perk for the first time, it'll severely mess with your ears, so just keep this in mind. If you think that someone is right in front of you, they're probably like 5 meters away from you. Superior Anatomy. Just like Bamboozle, do a moonwalk mind game before vaulting to catch survivors off guard and get free hits. Surveillance. This perk works really well with Jolt and Oppression because it allows you to see which generators were affected, which can give you a ton of useful information. Thwack. This perk is absolutely terrible, so just don't use it. Terminus. If you have this perk equipped, you may want to start slugging when there's 1 gen left. This will cause a lot of survivors to get injured, and they're either forced to stay injured and get Terminus applied, or they're forced to reset, which will give you a lot of additional time. Territorial Imperative. I don't think I even need to say anything about this perk. Thanatophobia. I know a lot of you like to use this perk on Plague and Legion. It's really good against bad survivors because they for some reason can't handle having a red progress bar on their screen, but good survivors will just keep 1 person healed at all times to completely mitigate the effect. Thrilling Tremors. While you're carrying someone, your cooldown might finish. If you don't know where anyone is, you can drop the survivor and pick them back up to activate Thrilling Tremors again before you hook them. Tinkerer. Use this perk on insta-down killers and on indoor maps to get a ton of free downs. Trail of Torment. This perk now remains on until the gen stops regressing, which was a much needed buff to this perk. So it's really good to use on insta-down killers since you can somewhat patrol the area and survivors can't really risk touching the gen since they know they'd instantly go down, but they don't know where you are. Ultimate Weapon. Similar to Hysteria, this perk's activation window and its cooldown are exactly the same at 30 seconds, so you can pretty much have it active 24/7. Unnerving Presence. This perk is extremely good on the impossible skill check doctor build if you're also using Merciless Storm. It forces survivors to pay really close attention to skill checks because they can be smaller, they can appear in random spots on their screen, and they can go in reverse. Unrelenting. There are some extremely niche situations where you can swing early at a pallet to force survivors to greed the pallet, and due to your shorter cooldown, you can catch up to them before they loop back. Whispers. This perk will activate regardless of a survivor's health state, which can be a pro or a con. It'll activate on hooked and down survivors, so you don't necessarily know if there's someone nearby. But at the same time, you can use it almost as a Deerstalker equivalent to find down survivors, especially if you're slugging for a 4K. Zanjin Tactics. If you don't know loops or maps, this perk can be extremely useful on characters like Nurse or Pyramid Head to predict exactly where a survivor will be while you can't even see them. Check out this video on screen now to see some hilariously fun and ridiculous add-ons that I came up with for every single killer in Dead by Daylight. Also drop a like and subscribe if you learned something new.